Got a courtesy resolution today for somebody who's probably very familiar to a number of members of this distinguished body, Peter Sortino. Peter's not with us today. He's at home. He's actually battling pancreatic cancer, so couldn't make it down here today, but I know he's watching on TV, and I hope we can say some nice things about him and send him this video of these proceedings. As many of you know Peter, Peter was a longtime Soulard resident and lobbied this distinguished board under two mayors, under Mayor Schamel and Mayor Bosley. There are many, many big projects that have happened in St. Louis, and a lot of them have Peter's fingerprints on them in some way. So I want to name a few of those. I won't read this resolution in its entirety. So, Peter is somebody who dedicated his career to this region. Like me, he did not actually go to high school in this town. He's not from St. Louis. He's a native Cincinnatian who moved here for graduate school and dedicated himself to our fair city. The light rail system that we enjoy in our town that we hope to soon expand, Peter worked on that project. The original building of the Scott Trade Center, which is much in the news today, Peter worked on that project. The expansion of the Cervantes Convention Center, Peter Sortino was instrumental in getting that project through this board. Adoption of the Forest Park Master Plan, another project that we can thank Peter Sortino for. Redevelopment of the old post office downtown, Peter Sortino worked on that. The establishment of our beautiful system of parks and trails in this region and the passing of the various propositions in St. Louis City, St. Louis County, and many other counties, Peter was instrumental in leading that effort to make sure we have some of the best parks and trails in the country. And that led to the establishment of the Great Rivers Greenway, which Peter worked hard on. City Arch River, another project that Peter and the Danforth Foundation worked diligently at. And perhaps what he's most known for, and what I'm very grateful for him working on, is the establishment of the Regional Health Commission. Peter's been the chairman of the Regional Health Commission since its inception in 2001, I believe. And that organization quietly has provided tens of thousands of folks in the St. Louis region with access to health care. And Peter is just a wonderful man. He's no longer a city resident, but he was a longtime Soulardian, and he's really had a big influence on Soulard. He's a role model of mine, and he's also the 2016 Citizen of the Year for St. Louis. So I'm happy to be up here today honoring Peter Sortino, and I hope many of you will join me in saying some kind things about him so we can send him a video of these proceedings. Thank you.
Alderman for the 9th.
First, I move that we embank this resolution.
Been moved by the Alderman for the 9th, seconded by the Alderman for the 19th, that we pass this resolution and bank. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion carries. Peter, you know what that means. That's congratulations on that. Alderman for the 9th.
Thank you, Mr. President. Early on, I was able to work with Peter, and you can't find a more dedicated, which we have many in the city of St. Louis, but a more dedicated person to the city and to the well-being of people. It was just great working with him, and talking to Alderman Coder earlier. If I remember correctly, I think he started in housing conservation many years ago. So, and Peter, you can let me know if I'm wrong, but that's kind of what I was told back when I first came in. But anyway, thank you for everything you've done, and congratulations on this resolution, and I hope you do well with your health.
All right, thank you. Alderman from the 17th.
Yes, Mr. President, members of the board, I am very grateful that the alderman from the 7th sponsored this. I have nothing but the highest regard for Peter Sortino. I first met Peter over 30 years ago, and it was in an ill-conceived campaign that was incredibly disruptive and one of the biggest failures that I was ever involved in. And Peter was the campaign manager. I think some of the old-timers probably remember that campaign. But he ended up shortly thereafter going to work for, at the time, then Mayor Schamel. And it wasn't too much after that that I came down here on the board as a young alderman, not really knowing my way around. We had our colleague from the 11th presiding at the time. And Peter was the lobbyist for the mayor. And in all my years down here, no offense to any of the lobbyists that are down here now, Peter was clearly, by far, without comparison, the best lobbyist I have ever seen work. And I say that, I came in at the time, and was largely, I guess, a political ally of Mayor Schamel, but as would be the case, you're over here sometimes and you not necessarily always agree with the mayor on everything, even when you're working closely together. And so when a hot bill would come up, you would kind of, this is before caller ID, you would answer the phone and on the other end would be Peter Sortino. And so I had gotten to the point where I would kind of recognize Thursday night before the board meeting that it was Peter doing his nose count. And so I would stop answering the phone, only to find out that about 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning it would ring, thinking that it might be a family emergency. I would roll over, grab the phone, and there would be Peter saying, "Joe, the mayor has on the calendar tomorrow." And while I'm wiping the sleep out of my eyes, Peter would somehow or another twist my arm or know what to say to get me to say yes, because he was incredibly persuasive. But as doggedly and as fastidious as he was in counting votes, the thing that was perhaps most remarkable about Peter was the level of respect he paid to everyone. As a young alderman, I have to admit, was sometimes a little condescending to some of the older members down here, and I find, I'm sure many of you may find that hard to believe, but I would quietly amuse myself by thinking of my own superiority. And I would see Peter going in to talk to someone who was clearly, not on the side of the administration. And he would go in and sit in their office and just get berated for everything wrong that the mayor did. And he would quietly listen, and then he would go ahead and he would talk about the issue at hand, and somehow or another he would leave that office with a yes vote. And Peter tracked those votes better than anybody I've ever seen before. So I had this wonderful relationship with Peter, and as times changed, we would have a different mayor, one that I didn't perhaps get along quite as well with. And he came in, and Peter stayed on. Not because he necessarily, had this big political thing, but he loved the city and he was good at his job. And so the new mayor employed Peter to continue to do that. And as things would happen, I would tend to disagree a little bit more with the mayor. And all of a sudden, I'd start realizing that my phone wasn't ringing, but I was being completely ignored. And I would show up and my vote would be completely unnecessary. It was irrelevant because Peter had everything all worked out. And occasionally I'd try to create a little mischief or something. And if Peter was out for the week or something, I might have a shot at pulling something off. But as soon as he got wind of it, I would be shut down in a New York minute. And it was just, he was that effective, that thoughtful. And folks, despite political ideologies and everything, his heart was always in the right place. And he really worked for the city. His accomplishments became recognized. And when we had an effort in 2004 to go ahead and kind of re-envision the future of St. Louis, the Danforth Foundation picked him up. And he worked over there. Eventually, he ran 2004. And what really, I think, was his forte was the understanding of the legislative process. So many of the initiatives that I think we as a region can be proud of, that have been initiated in the last 10 or 15 years, many of those grew out of the 2004 effort. And they required something that we could certainly use much more of, regional cooperation. And Peter had this ability to listen, reason, share a vision, and convince people that there was something, you know, in it for all of us. And he would be able to get legislation passed at the state level, at the county level, at the city level, at the St. Charles County level, and really develop some regional coalitions, and through that process did some pretty remarkable things. The alderman from the 7th kind of gave us a little litany of what those were. But that was, I don't know of anybody else in the region who had the ability to kind of get so many different levels of government working together like he did. And I was very fortunate. One of the things I'm kind of proud of, although I take pride in it for not having done much work, was I was the primary sponsor of GRG when it came through down here on the board. So I sponsored that legislation. I obviously always try to take credit for it, but in the reality, it was Peter who kind of wove that very complex process together and got all of the parties in the region to work together on that. And today, I think it's a remarkable thing that's, you know, our children and grandchildren will certainly appreciate. Peter would go on to eventually lead 2004. He then went on to lead the Danforth Foundation. I know as Republicans, I always respected Jack Danforth, and I'm not sure if Bill was necessarily that much of a Republican, but I've worked closely with him in his capacity as chancellor at WashU, and certainly he was an important figure in Cortex. And I don't think that there's anyone in the St. Louis region that the Danforth Foundation or the Danforth family has more faith and confidence in, and it was Peter who led them, and the distribution of all the resources that made up the Danforth Foundation in those last few years that it was around. So, Peter, I hope you're watching this, and I want you to know that you have touched so many people's lives in St. Louis, and that our whole region will be grateful for your efforts for literally centuries to come. Thank you, Peter.
Alderwoman from the 19th.
Thank you, Mr. President, members of the board. I don't know how I can even say the appropriate words to talk about Peter. I met him in my volunteer mode, being on various projects around the city, most especially dealing with education and families. Peter had a heart that allowed him to be extremely humanitarian. Smart man, but when you sit down at the table with him and you tell him the woes that you are dealing with and the dreams that you were trying to accomplish, Peter would find a way to make it happen. And I mean just the simplest things when you're talking about helping individuals. The alderman from the 17th touched on the Danforth Foundation. And so I had the opportunity to work with him there. We established a nonprofit with a grant from the Danforth Foundation, a $5 million grant that allowed us to start a nonprofit to help us change the culture in the 19th Ward. We knew that the only way that we'd be able to do anything in that ward when that new young alderman was elected was that we needed to get on the ground. We needed to work with individuals. We needed to turn crime around. We needed to make sure children were going to school. And that's how the Vashon Education Compact came out of that. Peter was right there. Danforth Foundation funded that with $9 million. So we had a good chance to make it work. And we worked on that neighborhood plan for a year and a half. All stakeholders were at the table. They designed their future for that ward, and we've been executing that plan. But Peter has always been there every time you get a snag in something, and you could call him and he'd help you figure it out. He'd send you to the right person. We could get it done. And so I don't know how many people understand that's how it works. It's not about you stand up and stomp your foot and I'm mad, and nobody never knew the conversations that went on. Because you don't have to be that public and that ridiculous in order to accomplish something. He could sit down and quietly listen to everything you had to say, and I've been in meetings where people were cussing him out. But he never, ever ever got out of line. He was always respectful. And so I thank him for all the things that I worked with him on and how he helped my neighborhood, my community, where I live, because I know what it was like when I moved into that neighborhood. Some streets you couldn't even drive down. Some streets you start driving down, you have to back out of it because of all the shooting and stuff that was going on. I mean, that's just how bad the crime was. But now we can look at our crime stats and say, we lower than Central West End, lower than downtown. We can talk about it. And those residents in Jeff Vanderloo and all those neighborhoods over there, they know the difference. The business people know the difference. But the work that was put in by the community and the opportunity to do the work was made possible with his input and guidance, because we had to report every month. I mean, he ran a tight ship too. He was about business, but it worked. So when you have a plan and you're working with the people from the grassroots up, which is what they insisted on that. And they said, go out and find some new ways to do some things. We brought people in here from Europe with crime initiatives that worked over there. We brought in Jim Brown with his crime initiative. He was on the ground. I got so scared one time the way they was talking to some of them little young folks. I was like, whoa, but it worked. So you know, you never know what's gonna work. You gotta try a lot of stuff. So Peter, we love you.
All right. Other one from the 28th.
Thank you, Mr. President, members of the board. Peter Sortino. What an awesome guy he is. Alderman Rohde, Alderman from the 17th, did a great job of explaining what a tremendous lobbyist he was. He would ask you for your vote, and then he'd call you back the next day. Lyda, are you still with me? He'd ask you for your vote again. And then that morning, he'd be here and he'd be walking around. Lyda, are you still with me? He'd ask you again, just in case you might have changed your mind. But the thing that I love about Peter is that guy's incredible memory. When he's lobbying you for something or even just talking to you as a friend, he can regale you with stories from 25 years ago and remember how everyone voted. Sometimes I don't remember how somebody voted last month or last year, let alone. He could tell you how everyone voted. An incredible memory. Can't find a better lobbyist, can't find a better guy. Peter and Leslie have made this community so much better over the years. And you know, some of you may know this, Peter's a great gardener, Leslie's a great gardener, Peter's a great gardener. He also makes his own limoncello sometimes and shares a little bit of that occasionally. Just a great guy. Peter, we love you, wish you well, get better. Leslie, hang in there. Thank you so much.
Alderman from the 11th.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning.
Good morning.
Mr. President, sometimes, probably due to lack of ability, words don't work. But Peter Sortino was the consummate lobbyist. And I know the assembled multitude won't believe it, but sometimes we can be difficult. We elected officials, we elected officials can be difficult. And Peter had the innate knack of being able to count to 15. And that's really what you have to do here to be a successful lobbyist. And Peter would carry that score sheet around with him, I guess, everywhere. Leslie could speak to that. I hope he said it on the bedstand. But the point being, Peter was a pro. I think he impacted so many things in this city because it was a different city then, and Peter was an inside player. Peter knew, let's call it what it is. If you knew Jack Danforth, chances are he could, most people would take his phone call. Peter played that to his strength. I think he genuinely enjoyed what he did. The only strike against him would be he was a Cincinnati Bearcat, but think of coming into here and being the impact player that he was coming from the outside. And that in itself is not easy. For those of us that knew former Mayor Shamel, he wasn't easy. So I just have the utmost respect for Peter. Peter, you know, rest assured, there are very few impact players. An impact player is somebody that is very, very good at what you did. And I wish you stay comfortable knowing full well that you made tremendous contributions to this great city of ours, and you've got the physical proof to show for it. So we wish you the very, very best. Thank you, Mr. President.
All right, thank you. Alderwoman from the first.
Mr. President, members of the board, I'm also one of the members of the board that got to serve with Mr. Sortino, Peter, both under Mayor Shamel and then his successor. And one of the things that I hear everybody saying, and I agree, is that Peter knew how to be a lobbyist. To be an effective lobbyist, you have to not let your personality and what you think get in the way of what you're doing. And so I don't think he took things personally if people told him no, or if they told him I'm not going to be with you, or they talked about why they didn't like the current mayor or whatever. He would smile and laugh and still try to talk to you about why he thought his position was a good one, and one that you should vote for. When I first came here, I had the good fortune to work with a mayor who understood the need for the middle-class blacks to stay in St. Louis, and that was Ms. Shamel. And so he worked with me, because he and I met about redevelopment issues. He worked with me about forming the North Side Shopping Center that was going to be a 30-acre shopping center. And it was under Christopher Grace, and Peter worked with me. And so we worked on this thing until the mayor left. And his successor did not understand, and it ended up we only got a 10-acre grocery store versus the 30 acres that was supposed to happen. And Peter worked for both the first mayor, in which we worked to get 30 acres, and then he had to work for the second mayor who was messing it up. And so he would have to come to talk to me about the new position, and I would say, well, Peter, didn't we just work with Mayor Shamel to get all of this? And he would just put his head down. And so I would be one of the people giving him a hard time about that. He never would say anything because he knew that I had all the paperwork of where we had written back and forth. He just put his head down and said, Sharon, yeah, I know. And so I would just laugh because it ended up, I didn't do what that mayor wanted to do because that was an absolute mistake. And because of that, we are now working on another 10 acres of that shopping center. But I admired a person who had to, because lawyers have to be able to argue both sides of it. So I admired Peter that he had worked with the original mayor in doing the right thing, and then he had to work with a mayor that was not doing the right thing, and he had to come and talk to the very same alderperson, and he did that with style. I was saddened to hear of Peter's illness. I used to see him around a lot because we shop, I guess, at a lot of the same places, Home Depots and Lowe's and places like that. I just want to wish he and his family and his wife well. He is a very thorough person, but he's also a very nice person, and I appreciated working with you. It mostly was the projects here, not the ones that were in my ward, but the one that I worked with. Even when he was on the wrong side of the issue, I don't think Peter was personally on the wrong side. I think he knew what the right side was. And I just want to say to you, Peter, get well, and may God bless you.
All right, thank you. Alderman from 12th.
Thank you, Mr. President, members of the board. I also knew Peter Sortino very well. Met him in the early 80s when he first started coming down here. I can remember him driving that little ugly red Escort, and I'd always had to try to find a parking spot for you, but I didn't mind. And one thing I learned about Peter is I remember Peter coming up to the board and lobbying aldermen, but he had a unique way of doing it. He didn't try to force you to support it, but like a lot of aldermen said, he'd give you all the right reasons to support it. I've never known Peter not to work with any alderman, even if he have differences. It was always worked at. And Peter was very instrumental in a lot of construction and things going on in St. Louis in the 80s, for sure. He loved his job, I can tell you that. I mean, he's the only guy I know, just besides me, that loved his job, coming to work all the time. But it was just great, and he didn't miss a beat with his family on top of it. So he was very good at what he did. I think Mr. Villa said it well, and the alderwoman from the first, you know, her and Peter could always work things out when she was down there. So that says a lot about his character in this position that he had. So, Peter, I enjoy talking about you. Just you and your family, we wish you all well, and we will see you soon.
All right, thank you. Alderman from the 25th.
Thank you, Mr. President. I don't have quite the storied history with Peter Sorrentino as some of my other colleagues might. In my relatively short time of 8 years down here at the Board of Aldermen, I have had the pleasure of working with him, though, and probably most notably on the passage of the park tax region-wide to help fund the Arch Grounds renovations and some other projects. And I can echo some of the sentiments that have been shared by my colleagues, that he was a very fair and deliberate person. And you know, even when sharing my concerns regarding the type of, you know, or method of taxation and, you know, how funds were going to be spent, Peter always was there to listen and actually, you know, take action in that regard and try and change the way things were being done to come to a more equitable arrangement for everyone. And so, you know, I've known him over the 8 years to be someone that is just a really good person, and I'm sorry to hear that he's been having some of these health issues, and cancer is a battle that's a hard-fought battle. So I wish him well. I hope you stay strong and wish your family all the best in your journey with cancer, and certainly appreciate all of the work and effort that you've put into the city of St. Louis. Thank you.
Alderman from the 18th.
Thank you, Mr. President, members of the board. You know, there are people who pass through a place and you don't even know they've been there. There are individuals who find themselves in particular locations and you come through and you never know that they have been around. But Peter Sortino is not one of those individuals. Clearly, from what we've heard here today, his contribution has been significant. And it is not simply his work in the position, but the type of person that he was, that is as important as the work that he did. I think what we're hearing is saying that Peter Sortino, and I did know him, I met him under the Shamel administration. I was an alderman then. I actually met him before then. He was a good person, and he brought that, yeah, you can shake your head, I've been here that long. And he brought that to the table, being a good person. And sometimes a person's politic can be being a good person, that they bring to the table both a sensitivity and a care for both the situation and those they're talking to that makes, in this instance, their lobbying worth listening to. Now, did he do a lot of lobbying with me? Not that I can remember, because a lot of issues, I was just on the opposite side. We knew it from the beginning. But he was a person that would be sure that he would greet you every day, that he wouldn't walk by you and act like you didn't exist. He would come back to you and say something that was kind and decent. He would show an interest in you and your area and the people of your area, and then show that he really cared for this city. He was a good person, and that was the politic that he brought to this city. And so his involvement in this city government has enriched this city and certainly impacted this Board of Aldermen to such extent that people will stand up and say good things about him. And you know, our elders would always say, you know, a lot of things happen in this world, but if people can say something good about you, you've done something worth being here. And he has done that. It has been a pleasure to know him and to be around in his contribution in this city. Thank you, Mr. President.
Any further discussion? Any further discussion? I also want to send my thanks for a job well done to Peter. Peter, you've heard it from various different aldermen today, some of your many contributions, but you and your family know those many contributions because it came at great sacrifice for your family, because that meant that you did not have time that you would have normally had to go do things with your family because of all of what was required for you to do the job that you've done for the city of St. Louis. And I noticed as the comments came in, you know, after we not only passed your resolution in bank, but what I found was when I was listening to the comments, nearly when you looked at the groups of people who stood up today to congratulate you and thank you, you had half of them from the north side, half of them from the south side, and a quarter of them from the central corridor. And that's what we're trying to do in the city. We're trying to find ways to unify and bring people together around common causes and common ideas. And what that shows is that you've been able to somehow bridge that gap. You've been able to reach people no matter where they lived. You've been able to communicate with them and have them understand that you're there to work with them, not against them, which is very difficult to do in the line of work that we're in. But you've managed to do that. You are a game changer. So I want to thank you for a job well done on behalf of my family and friends and people all across the city of St. Louis, like you heard earlier, that will benefit from your contributions for many years to come. Peter, you've done a great job. You've done a tremendous job. Your grade is an A+ from the city of St. Louis. Thanks again for everything that you've done to make St. Louis the great city that it is today. Let's all stand one more time and give Peter a big round of applause. Let him know that we love and thank you.
Just in closing, everybody, thank you very much for your kind words. You know, obviously, I think this was a testament to what a wonderful man Peter is, continues to be, and as he continues his fight with cancer. Thanks again, and Peter, congratulations. He's our 2016 Citizen of the Year in St. Louis, so thank you very much.